Hello and welcome to this video. Today I have a bit of a sillier video idea. I'm going to talk about hat tricks. It's a term commonly used in hockey, but I want to kind of break down the origin of the term and kind of look at a PWHL centered focus on hat tricks. I'm Mario in Black, so hope you enjoy. So let's start with the origin of the term. The sport of cricket, not hockey, is what originated the term back in 1958. If you want to see the most 1958 name ever, Heathfield Harmon Stevenson, better known as H.H. Stevenson, took 3 consecutive wickets in a match in England. The fans took a collection and presented him with a hat with the proceeds. Thus, the term hat trick was born. If you're unfamiliar with cricket, which I expect that to be most people, if you know baseball at all, wickets are kind of like outs. So he got 3 straight batters out, which is a pretty rare feat in cricket. The hat trick has been adopted by several other sports, including hockey. The commonality goes back to the origin where someone does something 3 times. In hockey, scoring 3 goals in one game is considered a hat trick. It's the same in soccer and in many other sports that counts points via goals. A hat trick can also be used as a pejorative in a sport like baseball when a batter strikes out 3 times. But in hockey, it's mainly used in the context of a player achieving 3 goals. When a hat trick is achieved by a player on the home team, it's tradition for the home fans to throw their hats onto the ice. There's documentation of the term hat trick and fans throwing hats on the ice being used in the 1930s and 1940s in hockey. There's conflicting reports on where the traditions of fans throwing hats on the ice began. The cities of Toronto, Montreal, and Guelph in Ontario all have claims of a local store rewarding a player that scored 3 goals with a hat after the fans threw theirs on the ice. Many teams will donate their hats to charity after the on-ice crew collects them. So it's not quite certain, when it happened, but 1940s, 1950s is the best guess on when hats started coming out on the ice. There's variants of a hat trick, and I'll talk about 4 of them that I know about here. The standard hat trick is just 3 goals in one game. These typically don't have a designator and are simply known as a hat trick. A natural hat trick is when a player scores 3 consecutive goals without interruption. That means no other player on the other team or their team scores a goal while they're on their 3-goal run. This is commonly viewed as something that can take place over multiple periods. However, there are some people that only consider it a natural hat trick if it happens in a single period. For this presentation, I'm going to consider any sequence of 3 straight goals by one player, no matter how many periods it took, to be a natural hat trick. A couple of sillier ones. The term Gordie Howe hat trick is thrown around from time to time. This is named after Hockey Hall of Famer Gordie Howe, who is known to be a physical player and also one of the all-time great scorers in NHL history. To accomplish this, a player must have a goal, an assist, and get into a fight in the same game. In the PWHL, fights come with ejections, and there hasn't been a registered 5-minute major for fighting in the league's short history. Teresa Vanashova did score a goal, get an assist, and was throwing punches in a game for Ottawa against Boston in the league's 2nd season. The penalty, however, was called roughing, so it wasn't fighting, and it wasn't technically a Gordie Howe hat trick by that definition. But, we can probably call something like that where a player gets a goal and assist and starts throwing hands as accomplishing the Vanashova. One that I don't see brought up often, but I have seen in a few places, is the Mario Lemieux hat trick. This is also something I've heard called the perfect hat trick before, and apparently nobody else actually calls this the perfect hat trick after I did a little bit of research, so maybe I'm making things up in my head. This hat trick is when a player scores a goal at even strength, on the power play, and while shorthanded in the same game. This has not happened in the PWHL to date. Mario Lemieux had a season where he led the NHL in power play and shorthanded goals in the same season. He's also a Hockey Hall of Famer like Gordie Howe. He also has a feat that I don't think will ever happen again. He scored an even strength goal, a power play goal, a shorthanded goal, a goal on a penalty shot, and a goal on the empty net, all in the same game. The odds of this are so small, it's amazing that it even happened once, and I highly doubt it'll ever happen again, at least certainly not in the near future. But if it does, it certainly be legendary. All right, enough about the former NHL players. Let's get to the PWHL. In the PWHL, there's been 20 total hat tricks in the league's first 3 seasons. 19 of these have been in the regular season, and the most recent hat trick occurred in the playoffs this past season. The team breakout is here. Montreal and Ottawa each have 5 apiece, followed by New York with 4. Seattle is the only team that has yet to record a hat trick, although they've only been around for the 1 season so far. At least starting next season, they'll have 4 new teams joining them that haven't gotten a hat trick either. The first hat trick in league history was on January 6, 2024, when Grace Zumwinkle scored all 3 goals in a Minnesota win over Montreal. It's also the first natural hat trick in league history. Only 2 players have had multiple hat tricks, Marie-Philippe Poulin and the aforementioned Teresa Vanashova. Each have a pair as of this video. The most recent hat trick, as mentioned, was the first ever playoff hat trick. Laura Stacey scored 3 in the first game of Montreal's first round series against Minnesota. Minnesota ended up winning that game in overtime, even with Stacey's trifecta of goals. The next 2 slides will have all 20 hat tricks listed out in kind of a table format. I've got 10 on this slide and 10 on the next slide. For each of these hat tricks, I have the player involved, the date it occurred, the teams involved, the final score, and any notes that I'll kind of go over some of the acronyms here in a second. You can see Zumwinkle's at the very top. The first hat trick in league history, as I mentioned before, was a natural hat trick. The 1 ENG stands for an empty net goal. You can see actually the first 4 hat tricks in the league's history had the last goal scored as an empty net goal. The PPG you see next to a couple of the players is for a power play goal. The SHG you see next to Claire Dalton is for a short-handed goal. And when there's a all ES, it means all even strength goals. In the description, I'm going to link a Google sheet that I've created. That's all the hat tricks. Got a little more information than this, and it's something I plan on making a living document, so I'll add hat tricks as they happen, which, they don't happen super often, so I should be able to keep it updated pretty easily. For those of you that are colorblind, the top 8 hat tricks from Grace Zumwinkle down to Sarah Nurse all happened in the league's first season. So they're colored light blue if you're, have a hard time seeing the differentiation. Marie-Philippe Poulin and Teresa Vanashova at the very bottom are part of season 2, and there'll actually be a few more season 2 hat tricks on the next slide. One of the odd things is that season 1 had 8 hat tricks. That was the most hat tricks of any season, despite having the least total number of games for the entire season and playoffs of any season we've had to date. And moving along to the second slide, for those of you that are color impaired, the top 3 are all part of season 2, from Hillary Knight to Cheyenne Darkangelo, and then Taylor Gerard to Laura Stacey with the playoffs and the brackets is all part of season 3. So there was 8 total in season 1, as I mentioned, which was the most of any season. 5 in season 2 with the 3 on this slide and the last 2 on the last slide. And then 7 total, including the one in the playoffs in season 3. So as you can see next to Laura Stacey, I put the playoffs in brackets, so you can see that was a playoff hat trick, which is also the most recent hat trick by happenstance. On this slide, you'll see there's a couple of OTGs listed where the last goal was scored as an overtime goal. Naturally, overtime ends a game because overtime is sudden death. So if you score a goal to create a hat trick in overtime, the game ends. You can't score multiple overtime goals, at least not as far as I'm aware. There's been 3 natural hat tricks in the league's 3rd season. Taylor Gerard of New York had one. Sarah Fillier of New York as well had one, and she actually scored the game-winning goal in overtime to win that game for New York over Minnesota. And then one of the strangest and kind of coolest, if I have to say, hat tricks I've ever seen was by Haley Scamura of Montreal against Vancouver. Montreal was down 4-0 in the 3rd period, and then they pulled their goalie pretty early to, try to get back on the attack, try to get boosted. You're down 4-0. The likelihood of you coming back is not too great. But Scamura scored 3 goals, all with her own goalie pulled, so Montreal had a 6-on-5 skater advantage. She scored all 3 2 minutes and 44 seconds apart, which is by far and away the fastest in league history. I've never seen anything like this in any league before, where players scored a natural hat trick or 3 goals at all where they have the player advantage because they're pulled their own goalie and managed to get back into the game, scoring 3 straight goals without the other team, putting one into the empty net on the other side. So yeah, Montreal ended up falling short in that game, but certainly Scamura didn't have anything to do with that. She nearly dragged them all the way back in. Another funny note is that there's only been 2 losses by a team that's had a player had a hat trick, and they happen to be the last 2 games that a hat trick was recorded in. And they both happen to be Montreal, which had a player that scored it. The aforementioned Skamura game and then the Laura Stacey playoff game. I will say the good news for Montreal, though, is that after that Laura Stacey playoff game, they ended up winning 6 of their next 8 games and winning the Walter Cup. So any bad feelings about losing a game while your player has a hat trick kind of goes away when you win a championship in the end. And one last note I wanted to make was Jen Gardner on the April 18th game. She ended up having 4 goals, and their last goal was the overtime game-winning goal. She actually had a hat trick before going to overtime. There isn't really a special name for 4 goals. We have hat trick. I guess if you get 6, it's a double hat trick. Never seen a player score 6 in a game before, so I can't exactly tell you. But Jen Gardner is the first and only player thus far to have 4 goals in a single game. So she had the hat trick in regulation, and then scored the additional one to help Vancouver win in overtime, and that ended up being a big goal for Vancouver because it helped them secure the number 1 draft pick and draft KK Harvey with the first overall pick. So Gardner's historic night ended up being really good for Vancouver overall. That's all for today's video. I'd like to thank you very much for watching. If you have any feedback, leave it below. If you have any video ideas, leave it below as well. Figured this would be a little bit of a sillier one, and something that is kind of a ubiquitous term, the hat trick, but not everybody kind of knows the origin or anything like that. You just kind of know, hey, hat trick is 3 of something. So glad to share this all with you. Hope you found some of the data interesting. Feel free to look into the sheet below. If you have any comments on that, feel free to leave comments on that below as well. Something I'll keep updated, as time goes on. So it's not a huge lift to update for every hat trick. As you see there's 20 and there's been hundreds of games so far in the league's 3rd season. Although there probably will be more next year with the 4 new teams being added, so we'll see. But appreciate any time you've ever taken to watch any of these videos. This is my 21st one of these. I can't believe I've done 21 of these. And it's just, every time I get a comment or every time I see it posted somewhere, it just warms my heart. But thank you very much for watching, and I hope all of you have a great day.